They thought they could humiliate a family of 4 just because of how they looked. They thought a badge and a uniform gave them the power to erase a hard-earned vacation. But what the gate agent didn't know was that the man sitting in seat 1A, the man watching her scream at a crying child, wasn't just another passenger. He was the man who signed her paychecks. This is the story of the Washington family, a corrupt airline policy, and the billion-dollar CEO who served the coldest plate of karma aviation history has ever seen. You won't believe how this ends. The air inside JFK International Airport was thick with the scent of roasted coffee and the frenetic energy of holiday travel. For Davis Washington, a senior structural engineer at a top New York firm, this wasn't just a trip. It was the trip. He adjusted the strap of his carry-on, glancing down at his 10-year-old son Ethan and his 6-year-old daughter Chloe. Beside him stood his wife Maya, looking effortlessly elegant in her travel trench coat, holding their passports with a grip that betrayed her anxiety. They weren't anxious about flying. They were anxious because for the first time in their lives, they weren't turning right upon entering the aircraft. They were turning left. "Daddy, are you sure we get the big seats?" Chloe asked, her eyes wide. "I'm sure baby girl," Davis smiled, squeezing her hand. "First class, all the way to London. We worked hard for this." It was their 10th anniversary. Davis had been saving for 2 years, secretly siphoning bonuses into a separate account to surprise Maya with these tickets. They weren't just seats. They were a symbol of how far they had come. They approached Gate B12. The boarding area was a sea of exhausted travelers, but the priority lane was empty. Standing behind the podium was a woman who looked like she had been sucking on lemons since the Reagan administration. Her name tag read Pamela. She had short, bristly hair and eyes that scanned the crowd with suspicion rather than service. Davis stepped up to the counter, smiling warmly. "Good morning. Checking in for flight 294 to Heathrow." Pamela didn't look up immediately. She finished typing something on her keyboard, her acrylic nails clicking aggressively. Finally, she raised her eyes. Her gaze didn't land on Davis's face. It swept over his hoodie, a high-end designer piece, but a hoodie nonetheless, and then down to his sneakers. She looked at Maya's natural hair. She looked at the kids. "Zone 1 is for first class and Diamond Medallion members only," Pamela said, her voice flat. "Economy boarding starts in 20 minutes. You need to wait in the general area." The assumption hung in the air, heavy and gross. Davis didn't flinch. He was used to this. "I know," he said, keeping his voice steady. "We are in first class. Seats 2A, 2B, 3A, and 3B. He placed the 4 boarding passes on the counter. Pamela stared at the passes as if they were written in an alien language. She snatched them up, not scanning them but inspecting the ink, looking for a flaw. She typed something into her computer. Then she typed it again, harder. "There's a flag on these tickets," she muttered. "A flag?" Maya asked, stepping forward. "We checked in online yesterday. Everything was fine." "Well, it's not fine now," Pamela snapped. "The system is showing a verification error. It happens when credit cards are suspected of fraud." Davis felt the heat rise in his neck. "That card is perfectly valid. I used it to buy coffee 10 minutes ago." "I don't make the rules, sir. I just enforce them," Pamela said finally, scanning the passes. The machine let out a loud, angry beep. A red light flashed on her console. Pamela smirked. It was a subtle thing, barely a twitch of the lip, but Davis saw it. "See, invalid," she said loudly. Several people in the waiting area turned to look. You'll have to step aside. I have actual first-class passengers to board." "We are actual first-class passengers," Davis said, his voice dropping an octave. "Check the name. Washington. I paid full fare. No points, no upgrades. Cash." Pamela sighed, a theatrical exhale meant to convey that she was a martyr dealing with unreasonable rabble. She picked up the phone. "I need a supervisor to gate B12. I have a situation with uncooperative passengers." "Uncooperative?" Maya exclaimed. "We're just trying to board our flight." "Ma'am, lower your voice, or I will have security remove you from the terminal," Pamela said, her finger hovering over a button on the desk. At that moment, the queue behind them began to grow. A tall man in a bespoke navy suit, carrying a Toomey leather briefcase, stepped up behind Davis. He had silver hair and the kind of watch that cost more than a Honda Civic. "Is there a problem here?" the man asked. His voice was deep authoritative. Pamela's demeanor flipped instantly. She beamed at the man. "I'm so sorry for the delay, Mr. Sterling. Just dealing with a ticketing discrepancy. We'll have you on board in a moment." Mr. Sterling looked at Davis, then at Pamela. He didn't look annoyed at Davis. He looked curious. "These people were here first," Sterling said calmly. "There is an issue with their payment." Pamela lied smoothly. Davis turned to the man. "There is no issue. She won't let us board." Pamela ignored Davis and typed furiously. "Okay, look," she said, looking at Davis with faux sympathy. "I can't clear the first-class seats right now. The system has released them to the standby list because of the fraud flag. If you want to fly, I can print you 4 boarding passes for row 42. It's the back of the plane, but it gets you to London." "You gave our seats away?" Davis demanded, incredulous. "We are standing right here. It's automated." Pamela shrugged. "Take row 42, or stay in New York. The flight is overbooked. You're lucky I'm getting you on at all." Davis looked at Maya. Chloe was starting to whimper. They had a hotel booked, tours scheduled. If they didn't get on this plane, the vacation was ruined. "We will take the seats," Davis said through gritted teeth. "But I will be contacting corporate the second we land." Pamela printed 4 new passes, throwing them on the counter. "Zone 4, wait for your group." She turned her megawatt smile back to the man in the suit. "Right this way, Mr. Sterling. Welcome aboard." Mr. Sterling took his pass, but he didn't move immediately. He looked at Davis, holding his gaze for a second, then nodded slightly before walking down the jet bridge. Davis grabbed the economy tickets. He felt humiliated, stripped of his dignity in front of his children. But they were getting on the plane. He thought the worst was over. He was wrong. The walk down the jet bridge felt like a funeral procession. Chloe was crying, softly confused why the nice lady had been so mean. Maya was trembling with suppressed rage. When they stepped onto the plane, the difference was stark. To their left was the sanctuary of first-class wide leather seats, champagne already being poured, a hush of luxury. Davis saw Mr. Sterling settling into seat 1A. He also saw their original seats, 2A, 2B, 3A, 3B. They were empty. Davis stopped. He blocked the aisle. "Maya," he whispered. "Look, they're empty," she hissed. "She didn't give them to standby. She just kicked us out of them." A flight attendant, a young man named Greg, who looked overworked, approached them. "Can I see your boarding passes, folks?" Davis handed him the new tickets for row 42, but he pointed at the empty first-class seats. "We paid for those. The gate agent said the system released them, but there's no one in them." Greg looked confused. He checked a tablet in his hand. "That's strange. The manifest shows 2A through 3B as blocked for security as of 5 minutes ago. Did you speak to Pamela? Pamela is the one who did this, Davis said. Look, we paid for these. If they are empty, put us back in them. Greg looked nervous. I can't override a gate block. Once the gate closes the manifest, it's locked. You have to take your assigned seats for takeoff. Maybe we can sort it out in the air. This is unacceptable, Davis said, his voice rising slightly. Sir, please. Greg pleaded softly. The captain is already doing pre-flight checks. If we delay, they'll scrub the flight. Please just take your seats. Davis looked at the line of passengers building up behind them, eyes boring into his back. He swallowed his pride again. Fine. They marched past the empty luxury seats, past the curtains, all the way to the back of the plane. Row 42 was right against the lavatories. The seats didn't recline. The smell of chemical toilet disinfectant was faint but present. Ethan sat down, his knees hitting the seat in front of him. Dad, this sucks. I know, son. I know. As the plane finished boarding, Davis kept craning his neck to look at the front. The first-class seats remained empty. The doors closed. The fasten seat belt sign dinged. The plane taxied and took off. As soon as they reached cruising altitude, Davis unbuckled. I'm going to talk to the purser, he told Maya. He walked all the way up the long aisle, past the rows of sleeping passengers, back to the curtain dividing the classes. He stepped through. There, sitting in the galley, was Pamela. Davis froze. What are you doing here? Pamela looked up from a magazine. She was wearing a flight attendant apron now. I'm the lead flight attendant on this sector, sir. We were short-staffed, so I'm working the flight. Please return to your seat. The seatbelt sign is on. It wasn't on. You're the lead? Davis laughed, a dry, humorless sound. Perfect. Then you can explain why my family is sniffing blue toilet water in row 42, while 4 first-class seats we paid $8,000 for, are empty. Pamela stood up. She was tall, and in the confined space of the galley she was imposing. Those seats are blocked for federal air marshals. It's a matter of national security. I couldn't tell you at the gate. 4 air marshals, Davis challenged, on a flight to London, and they just happen to need our specific seats, and they're invisible. Are you questioning federal procedure? Pamela's voice got loud again. Sir, you are becoming aggressive. I'm not being aggressive. I'm being ripped off. Go back to your seat, Pamela ordered. Now. No, Davis said firmly. I want the captain. You don't get the captain. You get me. Pamela stepped closer, invading his personal space. Here is what is going to happen. You are going to turn around, walk back to the zoo in the back, and sit down. If you say another word to me, I will have the authorities waiting for you at Heathrow. Do you understand? Davis looked at her. He saw the gleam in her eye. She was enjoying this. She liked the power. She liked putting him in his place. He took a deep breath. He knew that if he yelled, he lost. If he raised a hand, he lost. I want your full name and employee number, Davis said calmly. Pamela smiled. She reached up and unpinned her name tag, dropping it into her pocket. You can call me Mom. Now move. Davis turned to leave, defeated. But as he turned, he saw movement in the first-class cabin. Mr. Sterling in 1A had lowered his noise-cancelling headphones. He had turned in his seat and was watching the entire interaction through the gap in the curtain. His expression was unreadable, cold and calculating. Davis walked back to row 42. What happened? Maya asked. She's the lead attendant, Davis whispered. She blocked the seats. She claims it's for air marshals. Maya's jaw dropped. That's a lie, I checked the app. It says, seat block, agent discretion. She did it personally. I know, Davis said, but we're trapped in a metal tube at 30,000 feet. There's nothing we can do until we land. But Pamela wasn't done. About an hour into the flight, the meal service began. The cart rattled down the aisle. When they got to row 42, Pamela was pushing it. Chicken or pasta? She asked the couple across the aisle. When she got to Davis and Maya, she pushed the cart right past them. Excuse me, Maya said. Can we get some water for the kids? Pamela stopped the cart and looked back. Oh, I'm sorry. We ran out of meals and beverages for this section. Budget cuts. You ran out? Maya pointed to the fully stocked cart. I can see the water bottles right there. Those are reserved for the return flight, Pamela said. We have to ration. My daughter is thirsty, Davis said, his voice trembling. There's a tap in the bathroom, Pamela said, pointing to the lavatory behind them. That was the breaking point. Davis unbuckled his seatbelt. That is enough. Sit down, Pamela shouted. He's standing up. We have a security threat in row 42. She grabbed the interphone handset on the wall. Captain, we have a level 3 disturbance in the rear cabin. Passenger is refusing instructions and acting belligerent. I need you to divert. The cabin went silent. Every head turned to look at Davis, who was standing halfway out of his seat, hands raised in a placating gesture. I am not doing anything, Davis yelled to the passengers. She is starving my children. He's shouting, Pamela screamed into the phone. He's making threats. Divert the plane. We need police on the ground. The plane banked sharply to the right. The engines roared as the pilot began an aggressive descent. Ladies and gentlemen, the pilot's voice boomed over the PA, sounding tense. We are making an emergency landing in Boston due to a security incident in the cabin. Please remain seated. Davis sank back into his seat, burying his face in his hands. Ethan was crying. Chloe was screaming. Maya was holding them both, tears streaming down her face. They weren't going to London. They were going to jail. And up in seat 1, a Harrison Sterling unbuckled his seatbelt. He didn't look scared. He looked like a man who was about to make a very expensive phone call. The descent into Boston Logan International Airport was aggressive. The pilot, believing there was a violent threat in the cabin, didn't prioritize comfort. He prioritized gravity. The landing gear deployed with a mechanical shudder that vibrated through the floor of row 42, shaking Ethan and Chloe to their bones. Daddy, I'm scared, Chloe whispered, her face buried in Maya's coat. Look at me, Davis said, his voice low and urgent, ignoring the stinging stares of the passengers around them. When we stop, men with guns are going to come on the plane. Do not move. Do not say a word. Just listen to me and Mummy. Okay. The wheels slammed onto the tarmac tires, screeching. The reverse thrusters roared, throwing everyone forward against their seatbelts. The plane didn't taxi to a gate. It stopped abruptly in a remote section of the airfield, far from the terminal buildings. Out the window, the tarmac was a disco of red and blue lights. A dozen police cruisers, 2 tactical SWAT vehicles, and an ambulance surrounded the aircraft. Oh my God! Maya breathed, her hands trembling. Davis, look at this. They think you're a terrorist. I'm just a black man who asked for water, Davis said, a tear finally escaping his eye. That's the same thing to them. The captain's voice came over the intercom, shaky and breathless. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Police are boarding the aircraft. The front door blew open. 4 officers from the Massachusetts State Police stormed in, weapons drawn, but held at the low ready. They wore tactical vests. Pamela stood at the front of the cabin, the picture of a traumatized victim. She pointed a shaking finger toward the back of the plane. Row 42. The man in the hoodie. He threatened to breach the cockpit. He said he was going to bring the plane down. A collective gasp went through the cabin. The lie was so audacious, so monstrous, that Davis couldn't even speak to defend himself. "He's lying," a woman in row 41 shouted, standing up. "He just asked for water." "Sit down, ma'am," an officer bellowed. "Everyone down, hands on head." The officers moved down the aisle like a dark tide. They reached row 42. "Sir Hands, let me see your hands," the lead officer screamed. Davis raised his hands slowly, palms open. "I am unarmed. My family is here. Please don't scare my children." "Stand up slowly." Davis rose. Before he was fully upright, he was spun around. His face was pressed hard against the overhead bin. Cold steel cuffs ratcheted tight around his wrists. Too tight. "Daddy!" Ethan screamed, scrambling to unbuckle his seatbelt. "Stay there, Ethan," Davis shouted. "Get the wife too," the officer commanded. "No," Davis thrashed. "She didn't do anything, so. She's with the kids. She's an accomplice." Pamela's voice drifted from the front, smug and helpful. She was screaming at the crew, distracting us, while he made his move. Maya was yanked from her seat. They didn't cuff her, but they grabbed her arm with bruising force. Ethan and Chloe were sobbing, clutching each other in the seats. "The kids come with us," the officer said. "Let's go. Move." Then began the longest walk of Davis's life. The aisle was narrow. As the police marched him toward the front, Davis had to pass every single passenger. He saw fear in some eyes, judgment in others. Phones were raised high, recording his humiliation for TikTok and Instagram. He was the entertainment. He was the villain of their travel vlog. When they reached the front galley, Pamela was standing there, dabbing fake tears from her eyes with a napkin. As Davis passed her, she leaned, in her voice a whisper only he could hear over the commotion. "I told you. You sit where I tell you to sit." Davis looked at her. He wanted to scream. He wanted to rage. But he saw the camera on the officer's body vest. He bit his lip until it bled. They were shoved onto the mobile staircase. The cold Boston wind whipped at them. Down on the tarmac, they were loaded into the back of a police van. Davis in one, Maya, and the screaming children in another. As the van doors slammed shut, plunging Davis into darkness, the last thing he saw was the first-class window. Harrison Sterling was standing there, his hand pressed against the glass. He wasn't filming. He was on a satellite phone, and for the first time, he looked angry. The holding room at Logan Airport was designed to strip a human being of hope. It was a windowless box with cinder block walls painted a headache-inducing shade of beige. A metal table was bolted to the floor. A two-way mirror dominated one wall. Davis had been sitting there for 2 hours. They had taken his shoelaces, his belt, and his phone. He didn't know where Maya was. He didn't know where his children were. The silence was deafening, broken only by the hum of the ventilation system. Finally, the heavy steel door buzzed and swung open. 2 men walked in. One was a uniformed state trooper. The other wore a cheap suit and a lanyard that identified him as Agent Miller, FBI. Miller sat down opposite Davis, placing a thick file on the table. He didn't smile. "Mr. Washington," Miller began, opening the file. "You are in a significant amount of trouble. Where is my family?" Davis asked, his voice raspy. Your wife is being processed in the next room. Child Protective Services has been notified regarding your children pending the outcome of this interview. CPS. Davis surged forward, the chain on his handcuffs rattling against the table leg. Are you insane? We were going on vacation. That woman, the flight attendant, she lied. She refused to feed my kids. Miller sighed, looking bored. We have a sworn statement from the lead flight attendant, Pamela Higgins. She claims you were intoxicated belligerent and made a verbal threat regarding the integrity of the aircraft. That is a federal crime, Mr. Washington. Interference with a flight crew. It carries a sentence of up to 20 years. I wasn't drinking, Davis pleaded. Test me breathalyzer, blood, whatever you want. I had a coffee at JFK, that's it. We will, Miller said. But we also have the issue of the tickets. Mrs. Higgins claims you attempted to board with fraudulent first-class tickets and became aggressive when caught. I bought those tickets, Davis shouted. Check the transaction. It's on my Amex. Miller tapped a pen on the table. Look, Davis. Can I call you Davis? The airline's report is consistent. You tried to scam an upgrade, got caught, got mad, and snapped on the plane. It happens. Air rage is a real thing. If you sign a confession now admitting to a misdemeanor disorderly conduct, we might be able to keep you out of federal prison. You pay a fine, you get put on the no-fly list for life, and you go home. I'm not signing anything, Davis said, his eyes burning. I want a lawyer, and I want the security footage from the gate. There is no audio on gate footage, Miller said dismissively. It's her word against yours, and she has the captain's log backing her up. The captain diverted the plane, Davis. Pilots don't do that for no reason. It costs the airline $50,000 to divert. They wouldn't back her if she was lying. Davis slumped in his chair. The system was closing in. It was a perfect circle of bureaucracy. The lie had been written down, so now it was the truth. I need to see my wife, Davis whispered. Confession first. Miller pushed the paper across the table. Suddenly there was a commotion outside the door. Loud voices. The sound of authority clashing with authority. Sir, you cannot go in there. This is a secure federal holding area. A voice shouted from the hallway. I don't care if it's the Pentagon. A deep baritone voice boom. Open that door, or I will buy this building and demolish it with you inside. Agent Miller looked at the trooper. What is that? The lock buzzed frantically. The door flew open so hard it hit the wall with a crack. A man strode in. He was wearing a navy bespoke suit that cost more than Agent Miller made in a year. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, though his eyes were blazing with a cold, hard fury. It was the man from Seat 1A. Behind him trailed a flustered police captain and a man in an airline blazer who looked like he was about to vomit. Who the hell are you? Agent Miller stood up, hand drifting toward his badge. The silver-haired man didn't look at Miller. He looked at Davis. Mr. Washington, the man said, his voice surprisingly gentle. My name is Harrison Sterling. I believe you and I have some business to discuss. He turned to the police captain. Uncuff him, now. Agent Miller stepped between Sterling and Davis. Sir, step back. This man is a federal suspect. Harrison Sterling turned his gaze on Miller. It was like looking into the barrel of a gun. Suspect, Sterling repeated. Suspect of what? Being black in a hoodie or being the victim of the most incompetence I have witnessed in 40 years of aviation. Who are you? Miller demanded again. Sterling reached into his jacket pocket. The trooper flinched hand on his gun. Sterling pulled out a titanium business card and flicked it onto the metal table. It spun and landed in front of Miller. Miller looked down. Harrison Sterling, founder and global CEO, Regal Atlantic Airways, parent company of the airline they had just flown. Miller's face drained of color. He looked from the card to the man. You own the airline. I own the airline, Sterling said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I own the plane you dragged this man off of. I own the terminal we are standing in. And right now I feel like I own the biggest lawsuit in the history of civil rights litigation. Sterling turned to the man in the airline blazer, the Boston station manager. Mr. Henderson explained to the FBI agent what you just told me in the hallway. Mr. Henderson was sweating profusely. Yes, sir. Mr. Sterling, instructed us to pull the back-end logs from the boarding gate computer at JFK. And, Sterling prompted sharply. And? Henderson swallowed hard. The logs show that the tickets for the Washington family were valid. They were manually overridden and flagged as fraudulent by the gate agent Pamela Higgins at 8:42 a.m. 2 minutes later, she manually reassigned those seats to blocked/crew use. Davis sat up, the blood rushing back to his head. I told you, he said to Miller. But the threat, Miller stammered, trying to regain control. The flight attendant said he threatened to crash the plane. Sterling reached into his pocket again and pulled out an iPhone. He tapped the screen and turned it around so Miller and the police captain could see. I was in seat 1A, Sterling said. I have a view of the galley through the curtain. I started recording the moment Ms. Higgins refused to serve the Washington children water. The video played. It was crystal clear. On screen, Davis stands up. He is polite but distressed. My daughter is thirsty. Pamela's voice. Sit down. He's standing up. We have a security threat. Davis's voice. I am not doing anything. She is starving my children. Pamela acts into the phone, pretending to be terrified while looking bored. The video ended. The room was silent. That, Sterling said, pointing at the phone, is a felony. But it wasn't committed by Mr. Washington. It was committed by my employee, filing a false report, perjury, inducing panic, and hijacking a commercial aircraft under false pretenses. Sterling turned to the police captain. Captain, I am pressing charges against Pamela Higgins, and I am personally vouching for Mr. Washington. If you don't take these handcuffs off him in the next 10 seconds, I will have my legal team here before you can blink, and they will dismantle your department piece by piece. The captain didn't hesitate. He pulled out a key and unlocked Davis's cuffs. Davis rubbed his wrists, the metal biting marks still visible. He stood up, his legs shaky. My wife, Davis said. My kids. They are in the VIP lounge, Sterling said, his expression softening. My personal assistant is with them. They are eating pizza and watching cartoons. They are safe, Davis. Davis let out a breath that felt like it had been held for hours. He looked at Sterling. Why did you wait? I needed her to hang herself, Sterling said grimly. If I had intervened at the gate, she would have just claimed a computer error and rebooked you. You would have been annoyed, but she would have kept her job. I needed to see how deep the rot went. I needed her to commit the crime on record. Sterling placed a hand on Davis's shoulder. I'm sorry I let it go this far. I'm truly sorry you had to go through this. But I promise you the next hour is going to be very interesting. Where is she? Davis asked, his voice hardening. Where is Pamela? Sterling smiled, but there was no warmth in it. It was a shark's smile. She's in the terminal. She thinks she's giving a statement to the press about her heroism. She thinks she's about to be famous. Sterling checked his watch. Shall we go tell her she is? The main concourse of Logan Airport had been turned into a makeshift press conference. News crews alerted by the dramatic diversion of a transatlantic flight were swarming. In the center of the storm stood Pamela. She was playing the role of her life. She stood near the gate podium, still wearing her flight attendant apron, looking shaken but brave. A local news reporter thrust a microphone in her face. It was terrifying. Pamela said, her voice trembling just the right amount. He was screaming about bringing the plane down. I just knew I had to protect those passengers. When you're up there, you don't think about yourself. You think about the mothers and children on board. The reporter nodded sympathetically. You're a hero, Pamela. You likely saved hundreds of lives today. I just did my job, she said humbly. Actually, a voice boomed from the back of the crowd. You didn't. The crowd parted. Harrison Sterling walked through the center of the media scrum, flanked by 2 state troopers and Davis Washington. Davis had washed his face and straightened his hoodie, standing tall despite the exhaustion. Pamela's eyes widened. She recognized Sterling from the plane, the VIP in 1A. She smiled nervously. Mr. Sterling, thank you so much for your support. As you can testify, it was a harrowing situation. Sterling stepped up to the microphones. He didn't look at the cameras. He looked directly at Pamela. I am Harrison Sterling, he announced to the room, his voice carrying without a microphone. CEO of Regal Atlantic Airways, and I am here to correct the record. A hush fell over the reporters. Cameras zoomed in. This woman, Sterling pointed a finger at Pamela, is not a hero. She is a criminal. Excuse me. Pamela scoffed, laughing nervously. I think the stress has gotten to you, sir. Pamela Higgins, Sterling continued, his voice icy. You are hereby terminated from Regal Atlantic Airways, effective immediately for gross misconduct fraud and filing a false federal report. You can't fire me, Pamela shrieked, her facade cracking. I followed protocol. That man is a terrorist. That man, Sterling gestured to Davis, is a customer who paid $8,000 for seats you stole because you didn't like the way he dressed, and you didn't follow protocol. You fabricated a security threat to cover your own tracks when he tried to get water for his children. Liar, Pamela screamed. It's his word against mine. No, Sterling said. It's your word against my iPhone. Sterling held up his phone and plugged it into the AV system at the podium. The video of the incident, Pamela ignoring the request for water, then faking the call to the captain, played on the monitors behind the desk. The audio was crisp. Sit down. He's standing up. We have a security threat. The reporters gasped. Flashes went off like strobe lights. Pamela stood frozen, her face draining of color until she looked like a ghost. Sterling turned to the state troopers. Officers, please remove this non-employee from my airport. The troopers moved in. They didn't use the gentle touch they had used with Davis. They grabbed Pamela's arms and spun her around. Pamela Higgins, the officer recited, you are under arrest for federal perjury and interference with a flight crew. No. No. Pamela thrashed as the cuffs clicked shut. I was protecting the plane. You can't do this to me. I have seniority. As they dragged her away, kicking and screaming, she locked eyes with Davis. He didn't smile. He didn't jeer. He just looked at her with a profound, quiet pity. Have a safe flight, Davis said softly. The headquarters of Regal Atlantic Airways did not look like an airline office. It looked like a fortress of glass and steel, piercing the lower Manhattan skyline. The building was a monolith of commerce, a physical manifestation of the power Harrison Sterling wielded. For Davis and Maya Washington, standing in the marble-clad lobby 3 weeks after the incident at Logan Airport, the building felt less like a fortress and more like the final boss level of a game they hadn't asked to play. Davis adjusted his collar. He wasn't wearing a hoodie today. He was wearing a charcoal suit he had bought for his brother's wedding 3 years ago. It fit a little tighter across the shoulders now, but he looked sharp. Maya stood beside him in a navy dress, clutching a leather portfolio that contained nothing but a notepad and a pen. They held hands, their grips tight, anchoring each other against the tidal wave of intimidation the building was designed to project. "You ready?" Davis asked, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous atrium. "No," Maya admitted, staring up at the 40-foot ceiling where an abstract sculpture of a bird in flight hung suspended. "I keep expecting the other shoe to drop. Rich people don't just invite you to their office to be nice, Davis. They invite you to silence you." "Sterling isn't like that," Davis said, though a seed of doubt lingered in his own gut. "He got the cuffs off me." "He got the cuffs off you because he didn't want a PR nightmare," Maya countered. "Now that the news cycle has moved on, we're just a liability. They probably have a team of 20 lawyers up there waiting to offer us a coupon for a free drink and a non-disclosure agreement." "We aren't signing an NDA," Davis said firmly. "Not unless it comes with a number that sets the kids up for life." A young woman with a headset appeared from behind the security desk. "Mr. and Mrs. Washington, Mr. Sterling is expecting you. Private elevator bank C." The elevator ride was smooth and silent, the numbers climbing rapidly: 40, 50, 60, 65. The doors slid open directly into a reception area that smelled of expensive leather and fresh orchids. "Right this way," an assistant said, leading them down a corridor lined with framed photos of vintage aircraft. They arrived at a set of double mahogany doors. The assistant knocked once and pushed them open. The boardroom was vast. One entire wall was floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a panoramic view of the Hudson River and the distant sprawl of New Jersey. In the center of the room was a table long enough to land a Cessna on. Sitting at the far end wasn't a team of 20 lawyers. It was just 3 people. Harrison Sterling sat at the head, looking more tired than he had at the airport, but just as imposing. To his right was a sharp-eyed woman with a tablet. To his left was a man in his 40s who looked like he hadn't slept in a month. "Davis, Maya." Sterling stood up, walking around the table to shake their hands. His grip was warm, firm, and surprisingly human. "Thank you for coming. I know the last time we met, the circumstances were less than ideal." "That's a polite way to put it," Davis said, his guard still up. "Please sit." Sterling gestured to the chairs nearest him. Davis and Maya sat. The woman to Sterling's right cleared her throat. "I am Eleanor Vance, General Counsel for Regal Atlantic," she said. Her voice was crisp, professional, but not unkind. "And this is Mr. Henderson, our VP of Customer Experience. We are here today to discuss the resolution of the incident on Flight 294. Davis leaned forward, placing his hands on the table. "Before we discuss any resolution, I want to know something. Where is she?" Sterling nodded, as if he expected the question. "Pamela Higgins has been terminated. That happened before you even left the airport. But her termination is just the start." Sterling signaled to Eleanor, who tapped her tablet. A large monitor on the wall flickered to life. It showed a timeline. "After the incident, Sterling began, his voice grave. "I ordered a forensic audit of our entire Northeast personnel files. I wanted to know how someone like Pamela Higgins was allowed to hold power over passengers for 20 years. We found that Pamela had 19 formal complaints filed against her in the last decade," Eleanor explained, scrolling through the data. Rudeness, racial profiling, aggressive behavior toward families. In 2018, she made a mother cry because her autistic son wouldn't sit still. In 2021, she denied boarding to an active-duty soldier because she didn't like his tone. Maya gasped. "And she kept her job. She didn't just keep it," Sterling said, his jaw tightening. "She was promoted. Middle management suppressed the complaints. They prioritized on-time departures over human dignity. Pamela got planes off the gate fast. To them, that was all that mattered." Sterling looked at the man to his left. "Mr. Henderson." Henderson looked down at his hands. "As of this morning, the regional manager for JFK, the HR director for in-flight services, and 3 station supervisors have been relieved of their duties. We have completely overhauled our training protocols. We are implementing mandatory bias training for every employee who wears a uniform, from the pilots to the baggage handlers." "That's good," Davis said. "Truly. But training doesn't undo the fact that my children were terrified. My wife was manhandled, and I was paraded through a terminal like a criminal." "No," Sterling agreed softly. "It doesn't." The room fell silent. The air conditioner hummed. This was the moment. Davis braced himself for the fight. He expected them to offer $50,000, maybe $100. He was ready to walk out. Sterling opened a leather folder that had been sitting in front of him. He pulled out a single sheet of paper and slid it across the mahogany surface. It stopped directly in front of Davis. Davis looked down. It was a check. He saw the Regal Atlantic logo in the corner. He saw his name. And then he saw the numbers. He blinked. He looked at Maya. She leaned in, her eyes widening until they looked like saucers. She let out a small, strangled sound that was half gasp, half sob. "Pay to the order of Davis and Maya Washington. Amount $5 million. Davis stared at the check. $5 million. It was a number that didn't make sense. It was generational wealth. It was quit your job money. It was pay for college in cash money. "Mr. Sterling," Davis said, his voice trembling. "It's a lot," Sterling cut in. "I know. My board of directors fought me on it. They wanted to offer you $500,000. They said a jury would never award you more than $1 million for a few hours of distress." "So why this?" Davis asked, looking up at the billionaire. Sterling leaned back in his chair, looking out the window at the city below. "Because the system is broken, Davis, and usually people like me are the ones who break it. We cut costs. We ignore the complaints. We let the Pamelas of the world run our gates because it's cheaper than fixing the culture. I am an old man. I have spent 40 years building this airline. I don't want my legacy to be that I let a family be treated like garbage for the sake of efficiency." Sterling turned back to them. "This isn't just a settlement. It's a penalty. I am penalizing my own company. I want this number to hurt. I want it to be so big that every accountant and manager in this building remembers it forever. I want them to be so terrified of losing $5 million again that they never ever let this happen to another family." Maya reached out and touched the check, her fingers shaking. This changes everything for us, for our kids." "There is one condition," Eleanor Vance said gently. Davis stiffened. Here it comes, he thought. The gag order. The silence. "The condition," Eleanor said, smiling slightly, "is that you accept this as well." She slid a small, matte black box across the table. Davis opened it. Inside lay 2 credit card-sized cards made of heavy anodized metal. They were black with the Regal Atlantic Eagle etched in silver laser filigree. There were no numbers on them, just their names and the words Regal Infinity. "What is this?" Davis asked. "That status doesn't exist on our website," Sterling explained. "We only issue it to about 50 people in the world. Heads of state, a few A-list celebrities, and now the Washington family." "What does it do?" Maya asked. "Everything." Henderson spoke up, sounding almost reverent. "If you fly Regal Atlantic, you fly first class, always. For free. You and your children and their future spouses for the rest of your lives. You have a dedicated concierge line that bypasses the main switchboard. If a flight is sold out, we will bump a paying passenger to get you on. If you are late, we hold the plane within reason." Sterling smiled, a genuine warm smile this time. "You will never stand in line again. You will never be questioned about your zone again. When you scan that card, the screen at the gate will flash a specific code that tells the agent this person is more important than the pilot. It is my way of ensuring that no one anywhere ever questions your right to be there." Davis picked up the card. It was cold and heavy in his hand. It felt like armor. "Thank you," Davis whispered. The fight had left him. In its place was a profound sense of relief. "We have prepared a press release," Eleanor said. "It states that the matter has been resolved amicably and that Regal Atlantic has taken full responsibility. It does not disclose the amount. That is your private business. However, Mr. Sterling has already given a statement to the press regarding Miss Higgins." "What's happening with her?" Davis asked. "Last I saw, she was in cuffs." "The Federal Aviation Administration doesn't play games," Sterling said grimly. "Because she faked a security threat to a pilot in flight, she triggered mandatory sentencing guidelines. She is currently being held without bail. The trial is set for next month, but her lawyer is pleading out. She's looking at 3 years in federal prison, followed by a lifetime ban from working in the transportation industry. She won't even be able to drive a bus." Davis thought about Pamela. He thought about the sneer on her face, the way she had looked at his hoodie, the way she had denied water to a 6-year-old girl. He wanted to feel triumphant, but mostly he just felt a distant sadness that someone would ruin their own life just to make someone else's miserable. "Good," Maya said, her voice hard. "She deserves every day of it." Sterling stood up. The meeting was over. "Go enjoy your lives," Sterling said. "Go to London. Go to Paris. Show your children the world. And if anyone gives you trouble, call me." 6 months later. The video of the incident had been viewed 45 million times. It had sparked a national conversation about travel while black and the unchecked power of gate agents. But for the Washington family, the internet fame was just background noise. The reality was much sweeter. It was a Tuesday morning at JFK, almost exactly 6 months since the worst day of their lives. Davis, Maya, Ethan, and Chloe walked toward the security checkpoint. The terminal was busy, the usual chaos of shouting TSA agents and stressed travelers. "Dad, look," Ethan pointed. At the entrance to the priority screening area, there was a new sign. It was large, blue, and prominent. Passenger Bill of Rights. 1. Respectful treatment is mandatory. 2. Seat assignments are guaranteed upon payment. 3. Any disputes must be handled by a supervisor immediately. They put up signs. Chloe asked. Mr. Sterling put up signs. Davis smiled. They approached the first-class check-in. The agent behind the desk was a young man, new and eager. He looked at Davis's hoodie. Davis was wearing the same one he wore that day, a silent act of reclamation, and smiled. "Good morning, sir. Checking in?" "Yes," Davis said. "4 for Tokyo." He handed over the heavy black metal cards. The agent took the card and swiped it. The computer let out a pleasant, distinct chime that sounded different from the usual beep. The agent's eyes went wide. He looked at the screen, then at Davis, then stood up straight, practically snapping to attention. "Mr. Washington, it is an honor, sir. Honor. Welcome back." The agent didn't ask for a return ticket. He didn't weigh their bags. He simply typed furiously and printed 4 boarding passes on thick gold-rimmed stock. "I have already notified the captain of your arrival," the agent said, coming out from behind the desk to hand them the passes personally. "We have the lounge reserved for you, but if you prefer to board immediately, I can escort you to the aircraft myself." "That won't be necessary." Maya smiled, taking the passes. "We know the way." As they walked toward the lounge, the real first-class lounge with the waiter service and the showers, Davis looked back at the general boarding lanes. He saw a family arguing with an agent about carry-on sizes. He felt a pang of sympathy, but also a deep, grounding satisfaction. They had won. But the victory wasn't just the money or the status or the fancy seats. Later that year, the Washington Foundation for Aviation Equity opened its doors in Queens. Funded by an anonymous $5 million donation, the center provided free flight school scholarships and engineering tutoring for minority students. Davis stood in the back of the auditorium during the opening ceremony. He watched as a 12-year-old girl, who looked a lot like Chloe, climbed into the cockpit of a flight simulator. She was wearing a hoodie. "Checklist complete," the girl said into the headset. "Ready for takeoff." Davis smiled, tears pricking his eyes. They had tried to ground him. They had tried to tell him he didn't belong in the sky. But as he watched the simulator tilt back, mimicking the soar of a 747, Davis knew the truth. The sky didn't belong to the airline. It didn't belong to the Pamelas of the world. It belonged to anyone brave enough to fight for their seat. And that is how a power-tripping gate agent lost her job, her freedom, and her reputation in a single afternoon. It's a reminder that true power isn't about a badge or a uniform. It's about integrity. Davis Washington stood his ground with dignity, and Harrison Sterling used his billions to do the right thing. If you enjoyed this story of instant karma, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel. Subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss our next story about justice served cold. And tell me in the comments, what would you do if you were Davis? Would you have taken the settlement or taken them to court? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.